This is happiness, to be everything at once. Be unblinded, be unlearned, be unbridled and unburned.
Hey everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode of Mood Prep. My name is Dave Nixon, and today I'm actually going to talk a little bit about how to deal with being overwhelmed. I think more recently in my life, I've had a few things pop up that were both unexpected and came with its challenges, and then it's easy to fall back onto cliche things such as when it rains it pours and all that kind of stuff. And I think it just means that when things, for lack of a better term, busy and there's a lot of things happening and there may be deadlines, is that all you need is one or two more big things with deadlines in there, and it feels like everything's happening at once. Whereas a lot of the time, there's always something happening. There's always usually one big thing that we're focusing on, it's easy just to, as soon as there's a couple of things on, to feel overwhelmed with that. And it's also, things can be underwhelming. It's kind of interesting because very rarely are you ever just whelmed, right? It's not saying, it's like, how are you today? I'm whelmed. Thank you. Not over, not under, just whelmed. Or is it the same as gruntled? Like disgruntled's a thing, but would gruntled mean that you're happy? I'm disgruntled. I'm gruntled. So there's one for you to use today. See how you go with it. But this, I've had to pay a lot of attention, and more recently with my, I suppose, awareness around this feeling of becoming overwhelmed. And there's been a lot of challenges throughout that period, no more or less than what anyone else would go through at any period. But during this time, I found myself feeling on the verge of becoming overwhelmed, and definitely peaking into that state as well, for sure. And it's interesting that a couple of the things that really encouraged me to really take control of the way that I was feeling, when I was younger, having depressive thoughts, suicidal thoughts, all those sorts of things that I'm often very open to talk about. I remember that there were particular events that I didn't know how to deal with that were occurring that I responded to, and the way that I responded was quite, I would say, poor, in the sense that it put me into those states. I chose to be in those states. I didn't know how to deal with it, and become overwhelmed about being overwhelmed, etc., 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 not understanding that that's actually just called metastating, right? Metastating is a way where we will go, an event will occur and we'll feel a particular way, and then we will think about that feeling, and then we may feel about that thinking, and we could feel about the feeling, or we could think about the thinking, right? It's just metastating. And so what happens is that an event occurs, maybe multiple events, and we start to feel overwhelmed, and then we recognize that we're overwhelmed, and then we go, oh, I know what happens next. And then you start to feel extremely sad or depressed about being overwhelmed, and, always being dumped with all this pressure and always falling short and all this. And now we're thinking about feeling overwhelmed, and we're starting to realize that now we're responding to our thoughts and our feelings that aren't even actually related to the event that's occurred. The event is simply just a problem, like a maths equation. We just have to figure it out. But now we've gone internal, and we've started to metastate and start to think and feel and think, there you go, feel about our thoughts and think about our feelings. And what ends up happening is that that's when we end up getting really good at running a pattern. This is how some people can actually run anxiety. They do anxiety, they run a very strong anxiety pattern, or other people might run a very strong happiness pattern, right? And so what ends up happening is that we become overwhelmed about being overwhelmed. Whereas realistically, the problem is simply just the problem. A lot of the time it gets solved later on, and we could have saved this time of feeling overwhelmed in between to figure out and get out of our own head and deal with the situation as the situation is. And so in this more recent times, what's really been beneficial is starting to recognize when I feel that way, and recognize that when I'm doing that, I'm actually making the problem bigger than myself. Whereas in reality, I'm actually bigger than the problem, right? Give or take, that there's more context. I mean, behind every single thing that I say, it's contextual, and it depends also on intention as well, or motive, if you want to call it that. But realistically, I'm bigger than the problem at hand, but I find myself, if I'm not careful, falling back into older habits to a younger version of myself that didn't know how to deal with particular situations and start to feel overwhelmed, and I would respond accordingly to the pattern that I would have done when I was younger. Seeing that, this is why things are choices. I started to recognize that with all the work that I've done, especially over the last 18 to 24 months, I started to recognize a pattern running and go, hang on a sec, and then be able to step away from that and recognize that the potential reality that I'm running in my mind, that I'm actually emotionally responding to, or maybe, responding to with my thoughts, is simply just a potential reality. It's not the reality. And so in doing so, I can start to actually shift how I may view that reality and start to go, well, okay, ask better questions, such as looking at the situation that I'm feeling overwhelmed about and going, if this was easy, or if this was simple, what could that look like, right? It could be simply another question such as, maybe I don't need to know all the steps, but what would be the first step, right? And so what ends up happening is that if we're not careful, think of it like this. This is an easy example for me recently. I'm looking to sell my car soon, and so I've got software development that I've had to do with the gym. Other things are happening. I'm away for a week in Sydney coming up, and all this sorts of stuff. And then I'm like trying to brain the idea of selling my car and getting it ready. It's just a whole another thing that I'm building up in my mind, and it sounds like, well, then I have to try and find a way to get a detailer. I have to figure out how to get the decals off it because it's a business. Then it has to be cleaned. Then I also have to make sure that I then put it up on all cars, and then so on. And I'm starting to build up all these sorts of things where it's like, mate, just Google detailer. I'm not doing anything. I'm thinking about all the doing that I may have to do, but I'm not actually doing anything, right? And so to get out of my head and simply Google a detailer and make an inquiry and start that process of momentum towards a result, you see, it's very hard to be overwhelmed when we're doing. It's very easy to be overwhelmed when we're not doing anything and we're just thinking, right? And then we're stuck in those feelings. And then we start to romanticize about this feeling, and then we end up doing it again and again and again and again because we run the pattern again. People might do it with training. The example being like, I just don't have time for training, because in their mind, training is, I have to pack my bag the next day and take 2 pairs of clothes, to work, and an extra pair of underwear as well. And then I also then have to take my lunch break and then get out of my clothes. I have to walk down to the gym, which is around the block. I have to get out of my clothes, and then I have to hang my clothes up, and then I have to get into my other clothes and deal with a stupid person behind the desk. I don't even like them. They don't even know my name. And then I'm already starting to make this more than just walk down to the fucking gym, get changed, put my headphones in, jump on the elliptical or book into a class, and just tune out and start getting into my body rather than getting into my head. It's very hard to be overwhelmed when you're in your body, because your body is always here. Overwhelmed is always looking at the future, right? And a lot of the times we're grabbing past experiences and projecting them into the future. And this whole time that we're thinking and feeling and doing this sort of stuff, we're just kind of, I call it masturbating, because the reason why is we're just fucking ourselves, but we're not doing anything. We're actually physically not doing anything. Nothing's occurring, right? Besides our state changing based on a potential reality of the future that we are actually grabbing from the past and projecting into the future. So when you feel yourself being overwhelmed, the question is always going to be based around, well, what can I do right now? What is the one step that I can do, right? And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you might find yourself not doing anything, or you're busying yourself, and you're literally, inverted commas, busying yourself, but you're not progressing anywhere. You're just doing things, but you're getting no traction, right? You feel like you're doing something, but you're not. Once again, you're just masturbating. It's a lot of effort, but there's no progression, right? You're still just sitting there by yourself. Anyway, so how many people have I lost now because of this episode? Either way, you get my point that I'm making here. As soon as you feel yourself becoming overwhelmed, understand that you're doing that to yourself, and then you're not chunking the big jobs down into little jobs, and more importantly, you're not doing. The other thing to do is to find some sort of coach or mentor, find someone to work with and help break these things down, because a lot of the time we might find ourselves stuck in the picture and we can't step back and see that that's just a piece of art that's in a frame that we're looking at. And because we're so close to the picture, we can't see the frame. All we see is the picture that the frame's showing us, and that's how we often see the world. So you step back and you look at it and realize that that's simply just a frame of an expression, and that's all. Team, that's it. I'm out. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, if you found this podcast beneficial, it'll mean the world to me if you could pass it on to someone else that you think would also find it beneficial. And if you found any of my podcasts helpful or beneficial in any way, and you're in a position where you want to pay back, then the best way to do that would be to share the podcast, like I said. And if you're on social media and you share it, tag me in it, especially on Instagram. It's probably the easiest way to find me. Otherwise on Facebook, of course, but at DDNix. But team, that's it. If you haven't already, jump on Facebook and go to Mood Prep Online. It's a free group, and we can continue the conversation there, and you can do the Enneagram from there as well. Otherwise, I'm out. Until tomorrow, peace and pizza, kick today in the dick, slay the dragon. I'll see you soon.
To be everything at once, be unblinded, be unlearned, be unbright.